position for the score. Tight formation. Handoff. Blast. Up.
Bukaty with our friend Marco Marquez. Today on the show, we're going to check in with Stan Weber on the phone. We hope to have a special surprise guest after 7:30 or so. We're not going to mention that. Also, the Border Patrol Blitz will feature Gabe DeArmond and John Kirby. No Matt Walters because K-State is off this week. Dion Clisso will have high school football for us from Preps KC. We'll check in with Kevin Wins to get his picks for the weekend. And 9 o'clock hour, no Tim Grunhard because he is at his daughter's wedding. And so we are going to have plenty of sound from yesterday's media opportunities where we had Steve Spagnuolo and Matt Nagy and Dave Tobe and some of the other assistant coaches spoke to the media. And so that's always good to listen to the assistant coaches when they're made available. And so we'll have that for you also in the 9 o'clock hour. So plenty to talk about between now and 10 o'clock. Last night on Thursday Night Football, man, that was impressive by the Detroit Lions. They were up early and often on the Green Bay Packers at Green Bay, and they certainly showed that they are the team to beat in that division. And look, we know all too well that Detroit is no joke. And again, I had this conversation with a couple of people down at Macabre Cinema, Officer Crooks of the KCMO PD, who's always down there working when I'm down there. So he comes over and chats with us for a little bit, and we were talking about the Lions. And, man, I had a bunch of great people come out to Andy's Frozen Custard yesterday afternoon as well. Thank you to all the people that stopped by there. Man, I had there was at least, I think, 4 or 5 listeners that stopped by, and I had a chance to speak with them for about 10 minutes.
Thank you, my friend.
Man, some really, really cool people. There was one gentleman that came by and said that he was a friend of Jake's, and he just told me a great story that of how he knew Jake and everything else, and how he had listened to the show, listened to me since I was on with Whitlock, and listened to this show since its beginning, right? Really cool guy. And his name was I think Chuck Charles.
I like that.
I said, I like that. I said, sir, I don't believe that's your name, but I like that name. You sound like a film star, or perhaps you sound like you should be on the radio. Hey, This is Chuck Charles. Got some great hits coming up for you. And so, but he brought me a gift. He said a token of his appreciation that he was going through some of his stuff when he was in the military. That he had purchased down at I think it would have been Street Side Records back in the 70s, down in Westport, right? And he had an original copy of Rolling Stone that he bought in 1977 that was the tribute edition after Elvis passed away of Rolling Stone, like in 1977, that he went into the record store and bought and kept all these years. Like not a reissue or anything like that. The actual, when he went in there, a couple of weeks after Elvis passed away, bought the Rolling Stone with Elvis on the cover and all these stories and everything, and kept it, and it was in pretty damn good shape, and so kept it all these years, and then knew I was a big Elvis fan and gifted that to me.
Wow.
Yeah, that was awesome, man.
It's priceless.
Yeah, and I hurried up and went and put it in the car because I did not, I love Andy's frozen custard, but I did not want any delicious Andy's frozen custard on that special edition of Rolling Stone. So thank you very much. That was awesome. It was great. So anyway, it was a great time out there, and good time at Bukaty Cinema. I had a chance to go through with my daughters and their friend Delilah, and who had never gone to a haunted house before, and she was very scared. But the boss of the family, Susan, was there to protect everyone. So
that's good protection right there.
Yeah, they were clinging to her. You
Yeah.
know. And they had me walking, behind like 2 feet or so to make sure no one would sneak up on them. The hell with me, but
Well, that's the whole point.
Right. That's right. And so Bukaty Cinema, it's open tonight. Go down there. Edge of Hell. Awesome.
Great place to take a date.
Right. So, and we were keeping track. Yeah, it really is. Unless it's your wife, and then she wants even more separation from you. Like, get back there. So we were keeping our eye on the game last night between the Lions and the Packers, and it was interesting going in because trying to figure out, are the Packers for real? Is Jordan Love for real? Exactly how good are the Detroit Lions? I mean, that damn thing was over at halftime, 27-3 at halftime, and that's saying something. I mean, going on the road like that against, I mean, it's too early to call it. I mean, they're 2-2 now. I thought, but some of my opinion about Green Bay was formed by how good they looked opening week against the Bears. Like, wow, look at this. They're beating the hell out of the Bears. These Packers must be really good. Like, and then we found out the Bears are god awful. So
Yeah.
you can't really take anything away from that. But the Lions sure look good. And speaking of the Bears, now it looks like David Montgomery is turning in to the running back that we thought he was going to be when they drafted him out of Iowa State, because we were all hot and heavy on him his rookie year, remember, in fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
And we were both very optimistic about what he was going to do in Chicago. Come to find out, he's doing better in Detroit than Chicago. Last night, 32 carries, 121 yards, workhorse, but 3 touchdowns. And so, I mean, and just watch, like, Sam Laporta, the tight end from Iowa, he looks incredible. He's been a stud so far. He had 56 yards last night. Still waiting on Jahmyr Gibbs to live up to the hype that goes along with being the number 12 overall pick, And there were some smart-ass reporters last night saying, yeah, when the offensive coordinator said that, there's really not we almost have to come up with a new name for, his position. You can't really put a label on what he does. It's because they're going to only have him on the field for about 20% of the time. He literally doesn't play any position. He just stands there and watches. He had 12 touches. But, with David Montgomery's playing well. And look, I think one of the coaches was asked about it and said, you got to earn reps on this team. Okay, there you go. This is not a team that's just, middling and has playing time just to give away. That's a playoff team that we saw last night. That's a playoff. They're 3-1. That's a playoff team that came in here and beat the Chiefs opening night. And again, I get it. There's injuries, everything else. I feel very comfortable saying that if Travis Kelce plays in that game, the Chiefs win. And you might be able to say, hey, if Chris Jones plays in that game, the Chiefs win. I just say Travis Kelce because I don't think the defense was the problem that night. The problem was catching passes, and he's good at that. He's better at that than what was displayed from other people that night, right?
Mm-hmm.
But even despite Chris Jones being out and Travis Kelce being out, they still should have won the game.
Right.
If men would have just caught the football. But I don't mind seeing Detroit looking really impressive last night because that I think that makes me feel even. I mean, it doesn't erase the loss, but makes me feel even better about what would happen on that opening night. But yeah, that was my takeaway from last night. Detroit was excellent, and they jumped on Green Bay, and that damn thing was over at halftime. They were up 27-3. They end up, holding on for a 34-20 victory, but that there was no reason to watch that game in the second half unless you were watching your fantasy football team.
Yeah, the only thing that was worth watching in the second half was whether or not the Packers were going to roll over. And they at least came back and fought back in the game a little bit and maybe showed some character there. But that NFC North, man, the Lions look like the class of the division by far right now. If they've got that kind of a lead on both Minnesota and, of course, the Bears are just a complete non-factor, and the Packers have a home loss to them, it just it looks like Detroit is the class of that division by far. But, yeah, it's for the Chiefs. Yeah, Chiefs should have won that game. So I think that's not going to look like that bad of a loss.
No.
At the end of the season.
No, they're going to the playoffs.
And so. I give Campbell credit, man. I've changed. I switched my. I came around on him last year, but I thought he was going to be a joke. Listening to that opening press conference he had,
he's helped build the football team that he talked about in that press conference.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
he backed up one of the most bizarre press conferences we've ever seen.
And that's not all they are, though. They're good at football too. They're not just kneecap biters. They're both.
But they are kind of. I mean, they're a little bit everything.
Yeah.
All these weird things he said they were going to do, they've done.
Yeah. No, I've completely come around on him. Big fan.
And then, on that note, I've come around on Jared Goff.
Man,
because when the Rams gave up on him and decided, hey. We got a Super Bowl roster, but we don't have a Super Bowl quarterback, and they decided to go all in on Matthew Stafford, and look, it paid off for them. Right? They sold their soul. They sold their soul to the devil to get it, but they got one.
Mm-hmm.
Good for them. I thought Goff was going to go to Detroit and maybe be a bridge quarterback for a year or two until they drafted somebody else, and then he was just going to make his tour around the NFL of being Andy Dalton.
Yeah.
Hey, come in and start for a year, or come in and be a backup, or come in and play 10 games for us, and just be respectable. He's good, and he's not. They're not winning in spite of him. They're partially winning because of him.
Yeah,
and so that's really impressed me because when a team gives up on you, and that's what the Rams did, and they ship you off to the Siberia of the NFL. Where you trade me, Detroit? Oh. Thanks. Like now it's okay. Like, okay, go to Detroit.
Right.
I like that team. When he got traded to Detroit, you're like, what? Who's my coach going to be? Huh? Oh boy. Oh no.
This guy.
Right. Okay then. Thank you. But it's worked, and he's a part of it. He's one of the reasons why it's worked. So he's proved me wrong, and he looks like a really good NFL quarterback. Lions beat the Packers 34-20. That kicks off the football weekend. Let's go, Kansas City. We'll be right back after this on Sports Radio 810 WHB.
As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster.
Stephen St. John. Don't touch that dial. The Border Patrol will be right back on Sports.
to talk to my son's team today, and I think that's really cool. You know, it's awesome of Mark being willing to do that. I hope they have a good turnout of all the kids on the team. I know it's a player that they didn't watch themselves, but they get a chance to watch an NFL guy.
Yeah, but then they can go to YouTube.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I spent a lot of time showing my son videos of Mark and that offense, and I'm going to do that when I introduce him to the team tonight. And then I'm taking my son to a rap concert tomorrow night down at T-Mobile Arena. So
I'm as excited tomorrow night because, like I told you, we've been on this stretch where Richie has had to work or has had a gig it's been like almost an inside joke, every Canelo fight.
Yeah.
And I'll tell him like 2 months ahead, and they book him out pretty far. He goes, "What's the date?" I said, "I don't even want to say it." I said, "Here's the date." And he's like, "Oh, got a gig." And then this week, finally, he doesn't have a gig.
Yeah.
And Phil is going to tear himself away from his girlfriend for just a few hours. And we're going to watch the fight together. And which,
That's awesome.
That's
the best.
I sent you a couple of clips, Marco. We could play, there's a 4-minute clip that we can play later in the 9 o'clock hour if you want to help preview the fight because Canelo and Jermell Charlo they were on SportsCenter last night. But play this, there's a small clip of Canelo. He was on, Canelo's buddies with Mahomes and Kelsey, and they played together at the American Century Championship where my worlds collided, and I saw them all playing together and briefly passed out. Canelo was on the Let's Go podcast with Tom Brady, Jim Gray, and Larry Fitzgerald. Here's a small sample of talking about his preparation and discipline getting ready for this fight and really every fight.
Real competitors get the best out of themselves, and you never fail to disappoint. So we love watching you.
Thank you. Thank you for your words. I appreciate it. I always try to do my best, and it works. The key to continue winning, like be loyal with your team, always be disciplined with your family, in the gym, everything. I think you're going to get good results. And I appreciate how you see me because you're a great athlete too. And for me, it's an honor.
That podcast that they did, that the Kelseys did right after Tahoe, they talked a lot about Canelo. And I was listening to that podcast, texting you guys because I was off at that time, and I was like, boy, Steven's like world's just. Oh yeah, I remember after I talked to Kelsey on that last day on that Friday about playing with Canelo, and after I'd interviewed Canelo out there, it was awesome. It's going to be a really tough fight for him. Jermell Charlo is no joke. And this is the first time in boxing history, in the four-belt era at least, where you've had two fighters from two different weight divisions that are undisputed four-belt champions fighting each other. Charlo's moving up from 154 to the 168 division, but you have to remember, Canelo's built himself up to 168. So he's not a big, tall guy. He's not a big 168-pounder. And Charlo drains himself to get down to 154. And if you look at them when they weigh in, if you look at them when in the face, the face off, Charlo's just a bigger guy. Yeah, he's a bigger guy. And so I think it has every opportunity. I think in the first 6 rounds, where around the 5th round or 6th round, and I cannot tell you how much I love the fact that Jim Lampley's calling this fight. Jim Lampley is the GOAT when it comes to the play-by-play in boxing, and he's one of the best to do anything, right? Play-by-play of any sport. He's fantastic because, very simply, and the same can be said about you, that he loves the sport he's calling someone. He loves boxing. There have been guys I've listened to do boxing. They're just doing that to collect a check, and maybe they're not the big boxing fans. He loves that sport and is so invested in the fight that he's calling, and so that's going to make it even better for me. But I think there's a good chance, like after 5 or 6 rounds, people, oh boy, Charlo's, it's 3 rounds of 3, or Charlo's up 4 rounds, or whatever. Or Charlo's giving Canelo a lot of problems with the speed, blah, blah. But I think ultimately and eventually, Canelo is going to break him down with this tremendous body work. And when you start to see the 7th, 8th, or 9th rounds, I think it'll shift towards Canelo. And I think there's a chance, hopefully,
for my prop bets, the DraftKings Sportsbook, that Canelo can get to him and stop him late. If not, start to pull away and win a decision. But it's going to be a hell of a fight. And let's be honest, Canelo, even though he bristles at this, gets very angry when people bring this up, you know, he's had a lot of fights, a lot of miles on the tires, but he takes care of himself. He like you said, he stays ready, so he didn't have to get ready. But for a guy like Jermell Charlo, this is his moment in the sun. This is the biggest fight of his career.
Yeah.
But he's had big fights, but he ain't never been in this deep water.
Right.
And Canelo's a shark, and he'll bite his ass.
Is it me, or does Canelo fight more often than the average fighter?
Sure he does. Especially nowadays.
It seems like he's always getting ready for a fight.
Especially now.
Yeah.
You can't get some of these guys to fight 2 or 3 times a year.
Yeah.
No way.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why he's been so successful, because of his activity. Absolutely, yes. We'll take a break. Back after this on Sports Radio 810 WHB.
Another summer ending, and maybe you notice this summer that your energy is lower and your workouts not so productive. Perhaps you aren't sleeping as well and feel...
Stan Weber, I did want to mention, of course, the American Royal Barbecues this weekend. Sports Radio 810 WHB is the official media partner of the American Royal World Series of Barbecue. Special thanks to all of our great partners. Pork Radio 810, which is Nate's nickname on the road, is presented by Hollywood Casino and Parisi Coffee. Wonderful people. I've enjoyed Parisi Coffee and I've enjoyed the Hollywood Casino, maybe in that order. And also J. Rieger Distillery. You pick up the official vodka of the Kansas City Chiefs only from J. Rieger and Company, Kansas City's original distillery. And Victory Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram. Come experience true transparency and true relational selling. Visit them at Kansas City's only automotive outlet mall at the Legends and KCK Victory Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram. Pork Radio 810. Now let's say hello to Mr. Stan Weber. Stan, good morning. How are you?
I'm doing great. Good morning.
Stan, how do you feel about a bye week right now at this point in the season?
It could be a little bit earlier than some teams would like because they'd like to get a little bit more bruised up and then get a break and make the last final run of the season. But for K-State, I think it works out very well because they had a very physical game against Missouri where both teams came out bruised and battered. I mean, we keep getting reports even from Mizzou this week, like, are these players Brady Cook going to be available after being hurt against K-State? So there was a lot of physicality in that game. They had an emotional game to start conference play. It's only the sixth time in 28 years K-State got to start conference play at home, and they had to win. They needed to get off to a 1-0 start, bounce back. They got that done, but the fact is they've got their injuries that they need to overcome, and so I think it actually works out pretty well. Because they won their opener in Big 12 conference play, they can get their head set back on what's remaining in the season and get Will Howard 100% because he was questionable going into the game against UCF. So I think it works out really well. Coaches say would like to have a little bit more time playing before we get a break, but I think it works out well this year for K-State.
Yeah, you mentioned that. I mean, Mizzou, their injury report for Vanderbilt listed as questionable Brady Cook, Luther Burden, Marcellus Johnson, Brett Norfleet, Ennis Rakestraw, Darius Robinson. There's a lot of good players that are questionable on that injury list, and so you make a good point about these teams being banged up right now. So you mentioned UCF. We expected it to be a good game. What were your takeaways since we will see UCF try to navigate their way through the rest of the Big 12 schedule? What did you think of that team up close after you've watched them lose to K-State?
I think, number one, Gus Malzahn is the head coach, and you got to go back and study the successful 8 years he had at Auburn. And some of these coaches, you get tired of what they are or what's going on, and you cycle them out. And so Auburn did that with a guy that took him to a national championship game, and he lands on his feet and is the head coach of UCF. And not as known a program, obviously. Finally, they're getting their due stepping into the Big 12. But you got a coach like that that's used to coaching at this level, is very dynamic at calling plays and designing plays. So they are an offensive football team, and they lived up to that. They ran a flea flicker for a 69-yard touchdown that was as flawless as it used to be a simple off-tackle running play. They made it look like the ball was in the receiver's hands 40 yards downfield in like 2 seconds. They took the snap, handed off, pitched it back to the quarterback, and he threw the open guy, and it's almost like there was no recovery time. K-State was moving up to the run, and they're catching the ball in stride downfield 20 yards ahead of K-State and have an easy touchdown. And they were able to do that. So they're just a team that can score running the football or passing the football. They're dangerous, and they really showed that against K-State because K-State had them in 3rd and 12, and then they'd throw a beautiful pass to some really good wide receivers and end up scoring a touchdown or running a draw play on 3rd and long and then watching them bust it out for 25 or 30 yards. So offensively, UCF was everything that you could imagine. Defensively, they're not bad. They don't have bad players anywhere, but they don't have dominant players anywhere either. And I think if you can start wearing them down a little bit, they don't have the capability of staying with the best offensive fronts in the Big 12, but you've got to get there. Can you keep the ball long enough to start wearing them down? And K-State was able to do that. The time of possession heavily on K-State's side. The number of plays K-State ran way more than UCF. So they kept UCF on the sidelines with that explosive offense, and he wore some down on defense so that K-State was able to have DJ Giddens carry the ball 30 times. And that's right, I said that, not 20, which would be a lot nowadays, right, in the rotation of running backs. He ran it 30 times, caught 8 passes for 293 yards. Only Darren Sproles had more yardage from scrimmage as a K-State running back in K-State history. So pretty amazing day, but K-State had to play well to beat UCF. So this is a football team, UCF, that's ready to step up to the Big 12. It's not as if they're going to get beaten up and welcome to the big time. It's not that way. Coach, offense is right up there with anybody, and then they have the capability and the mindset that they can compete with anybody. You think about Josh Heupel being the coach there, Scott Frost, just unbelievable season. So they've been to BCS Bowls or New Year's Day Bowls. They're not mentally weak at all. You got to beat them. And they actually had the lead against K-State in the third quarter, crazily. And K-State had to bounce back and finish it off. And they did in big-time fashion. Will Howard throwing the ball well, DJ Giddens and the offensive line getting after it. But, yeah, UCF's a legitimate opponent. I don't think they're in a race to be in the Big 12 championship game. I think that's down to 5 teams in my mind out of 14. 5 teams have a chance in my mind to be a part of the Big 12 championship. I don't think UCF will, but they'll be feisty and hard to beat every game.
You know, Stan, you and I were talking last week about how hard it really is to replace a player like Deuce Vaughn because, yeah, he's on a really, really good team, but he was a special player. And it's impossible to just, like, recreate another player like that. And, you know, preseason newcomer of the year is Trayshawn Ward. He's obviously got a lot of talent and everything, but I don't remember hearing a ton about DJ Giddens being a guy that was going to become a star this year. You're talking about almost 300 yards between those 30 carries you mentioned and the 8 receptions for 86 yards. I know he's built differently than Deuce and all that, but I mean, if a guy's putting up a day like that in the Big 12, that is a superstar type performance. What should we know about him, and what should expectations be for him going forward after a game like this?
Well, Nate, his expectations just changed, right?
Yeah.
I remember one of the worst things to do, and I've talked to you about this off the air, one of the worst things to do is put some kind of performance like that together in front of Bill Snyder back in the day. And he's like, oh, okay, so you're that good. Let's go. Our expectations just changed. And why wouldn't it now for DJ Giddens? You're right. Replacing Deuce Vaughn is so hard. He was a Swiss Army knife, an exceptional player, but what he could do is go line up at wide receiver and run routes like a wide receiver and catch the ball over the middle in the linebacker area with safeties draped all over him on 3rd and 7. Nate, guess what DJ Giddens did in this game? Those 8 receptions were not simple catches. He actually replicated what we talked about Deuce Vaughn doing. He lined up in a slot, ran a slant on 3rd down with a guy draped all over him, and the ball wasn't in his chest. He had to reach out to catch the ball, and you would have been happy seeing it be a Kansas City Chiefs catch on 3rd down. I mean, it was pretty amazing. He's from Junction City, basically a walk-on. Junction City's right next to Manhattan, and so basically a walk-on. Did a good job last year, averaging almost 6 yards a carry as the secondary back. It's always easier to be the second guy. Here comes Deuce, and then here comes DJ. But the fact is that he showed the capability of making catches. He made a nice catch down the field against Alabama, made a nice catch down the field against TCU. And you know what those K-State TCU games are like last year. So he showed us a little bit. Now that we think about it, he actually ran routes out of the backfield really well and caught the ball. But he's a little stronger, bigger type of back. You don't think of him like dancing side to side as much as maybe a Trayshawn Ward. But, Stephen, we were talking about that Mizzou game. Trayshawn Ward, who was sharing the carries and actually was a guy who was used more against Mizzou when K-State needed to throw the football. He didn't even play against UCF. So DJ Giddens is a kind of old-school player, and maybe that's what popped in his head too, because he had to carry the load. Nowadays we share running back responsibilities so much because we want to keep running backs fresh. We don't want them to get too beat up. But there was an old saying back in the day that guys got in the rhythm, right, that they got better. Christian Okoye, remember those days? Barry Word. These are – Steven's like getting a smile on his face right now. He remembers his childhood.
Backs by popular demand. Yeah,
those guys got better, right? So I think DJ, knowing he had the whole load, is a little bit of an old-school guy, and I think he took to it very, very well and got better as the game went on. So his expectations have changed. Nate, you're going to know a lot more about him. because he put up a pretty good year last year with over 500 yards rushing, quietly behind Deuce Vaughn. And right now, coming into what he just did, that's more yards than Deuce Vaughn ever rushed for in a game. That's more yards than Deuce Vaughn ever got in total yards in a game. I just said only Darren Sproles, who had 2 games with more than 293 yards, had more yards from scrimmage. So maybe DJ Giddens should be talked about in more superstar terms, but that wasn't the case even 2 weeks ago. He was just a very good back that the K-State coaches really believe in.
We have Stan Weber on the line. Stan, as we mentioned, K-State is off. So I wanted to ask you about looks like the biggest matchup in the Big 12 this weekend. It's Kansas at Texas, a battle of two 4-0 teams down in Austin. Texas is favored by 16.5. And remember, even though Lance Leipold does not want to talk about it, Kansas did go down there and win 2 years ago. And then Texas got their revenge last year. What do you make of this matchup? Because I think this is going to be really interesting to watch at 2:30 on Saturday afternoon on ABC.
Well, it is going to be very interesting, and I think it will be competitive. You've got to start with the game is up to Texas, in my mind. If the Longhorns play to their highest level, there's no one in the Big 12 that can compete with them right now because Quinn Ewers is a sophomore quarterback. He stepped his game up. Arch Manning, remember we talked about Arch Manning being recruited and signing with Texas? And last year at this time when we talked about that, Stephen, that he might be going to the University of Texas, I was kind of shaking my head saying I think Manning's going to end up being the starting quarterback. It's a little bit unfair because freshmen deserve a time to learn and gravitate toward the challenge that is college football. But I just thought, I think Manning may start because Ewers was inconsistent last year. You look at his third down throwing, his fourth quarter QBR rating, things like that. He was not finishing games for Texas in the way that they needed to, and therefore they ended up being what most people love saying about Texas. Great athletes, big-time roster, but find a way to lose games and end up not being in the Big 12 championship game. I mean, that's what most people expect from Texas every year. And I think a lot of fans who have been around the Big 12 a long time feel the same way about this season. But it's not Manning. It's Quinn Ewers who has upped his game. He is playing a lot better. The way he went and kept his composure at Alabama and was able to take on that defense and get the job done, he is a very good quarterback who is a grown-up right now. He's no longer the freshman. So he should put together a very solid game. Unless he does that, unless he's loose with the football, Texas should be pretty strong. Athletically, they're good. They're gaining confidence, I think, and trying to take the next step and not be a team that's good one week and then not so good another. But we'll see. Consistency has not yet been stamped onto this 2023 Texas team, and we got to see if they have it. I mean, they can go out and play against Alabama the way they did. The fact is they didn't play well against Wyoming, but they got out of there. Then they went to Baylor, and Baylor played Utah very, very well. Remember that? I mean, we look at Baylor as a team that's lost something like 8 straight. I don't know the exact number, but 8 straight FBS opponent games going back to last year. You might think it's easy, but Baylor fought Utah right down to the end and had the lead, guys, within the last 2 minutes. So Baylor could be tough, and Texas went and did their job. So are they a consistent football team? Have they taken it to another level week after week? We'll see. But it's their choice if they play their best. But if they don't, this game could be very competitive because even if Texas uses their strength and size and all the advantages they have on defense, that is not going to stop Kansas' offense. KU's offense can do whatever they need to do, pass, run. If you're too big and strong up the middle, then they don't mess with the middle. They can hit you on the edges. Their play design is pretty incredible. So I think Kansas is going to move the ball. And therefore, I think they have a chance to stay around and be in the ball game. But Texas is going to need to falter for Kansas to win. Until proven otherwise, I think Kansas is going to play with a free mind, have everything to gain, nothing to lose. They're at a great point in the development of a football program. There's nothing more fun, guys, than playing with a team that is in year 2 of establishing themselves with respect. The fans come to their game, and there's belief, but yet another whole step that no one thinks they can take. Like, you're not going to win at Texas. But they know deep down when they look around the locker room, hey, I believe in you, and I believe in you. And why wouldn't you do that? And I'm not intimidated by them. And, hey, I watched the tape, and I think we can compete. I mean, you have everything to gain, nothing to lose. You've developed your confidence. I think Kansas will be very, very, very dangerous to Texas. That said, Texas comes out, concentrates, acts like it's Alabama or something like that, and plays their best. They're better than KU. So they should win. But at home, it's not an intimidating place to play, guys. It is not intimidating to play at Texas. So I think Kansas will play with a free mind. If Texas messes around, it could be a high-scoring shootout that could go either way.
You know, a couple observations on that, Stan. Getting to go to the KU game last weekend, I've kind of ranted on this a lot this week. The body language of the team, the guys on the bench, even the guys that are on the field, when they line up and for plays, you can just see exactly what you were talking about in terms of the mind space this team is in right now. They believe, they're having fun, they're engaged in everything. And when it comes to the part that I'm going to be interested to see, you know, all the years I did the sidelines at KU, during most of those years that were pretty brutal, you'd look at the sideline and then you'd look across the sideline and look at the guys on the other team and go, "Whew, one team, this looks like a mismatch. This looks like an ass kicking that's about to happen." And when I looked at just the defensive linemen, the offensive linemen, and the tight ends and everything for KU against BYU, they looked like the bigger, more physical team. Now, I'm going to be really interested to see what they look like when they line up against Texas. You know, do they look as big and strong and all that stuff as those guys? That's kind of what I'm looking to see on Saturday. But to tie it together with the performance you just talked about with K-State, one of the things that stands out to me, KU and K-State both played newcomers to the league that were off to 3-0 starts last weekend. And in the modern era of football, where, you know, the passing game rules, and we talk about that all the time. You know, K-State, we just talked about the way they ran the ball against Central Florida. Central Florida had more passing yards, but K-State ran the ball and really, you know, won the game comfortably. Kansas got outpassed by BYU 357 to 130, but they outrushed them 221 to 9. And I think I'm curious your thoughts on both these schools. They're both very good offensively, and they can put up points, but how important the run game is to both Kansas and Kansas State. Your thoughts on maybe that going against the grain of what we think about anyways when we think about modern-day football?
Yeah, see, the passing game is how you win in the NFL forever, and now people all realize it. You know, when Andy Reid started doing that 20 years ago, as a head coach with Philadelphia, people were like kind of shaking their heads and looking at him with a stink eye, like, "Oh, well, why are you passing so much?" Well, it is. The passing game is so important and effective, and it is. In pro football, it's all about the quarterbacks. And in college, the passing game is important. But what you need to do, and the best teams do, is find balance in their offense. If you can become indifferent when you run the ball versus passing the ball, then you're hard to defend, because you put the linebackers and safeties in a bind, because they need to be up there, big shoulder pads in the run if you're running, and they need to be dropping into coverage effectively if you pass. And if they don't know if you're running or passing, it makes them slow to react on everything that they do. So running, you know, some of these teams that are like a UCF, let's just get away from KU and K-State for a second. UCF offensively had over 600 yards, a 611-yard average, and they had 550, like their worst game starting in their first three games against K-State. And you might think, man, look at them pass the ball. Yes, go watch the tape. We'll show you all kinds of pass plays. But you know what? They actually were just as explosive running the ball. And they try to trick you into thinking it's all about the passing game. But these great coordinators, Nate, remember that the run matters. They don't mind. You know, it used to be when you ran the ball, it was about manhood, okay? When Nebraska was great. Stephen, can you remind some of the listeners, Nebraska used to be great, okay? I mean,
well,
when Nebraska was great, remember those days?
My memory's not that good, but I believe you're correct, Stan.
Okay, you're old enough to verify this, right? They would punch you in the mouth, and if they didn't run over you and hit you in the interior line, it was almost as if they were embarrassed to win the game, Nate. I mean, it wasn't only about football and the scoreboard. It was about establishing their manhood and their toughness and breaking your will physically, okay? That was a mentality that occurred for a long time in football. But that's no longer the mentality today. These coaches are very willing, as offensive coordinators, to have you lighten up the box, you know, spread you out and make you think, ooh, there are four guys lined up. Well, one of them is usually a tight end, right? Or like I said, a running back for K-State. They don't actually have 4 and 5 wide receiver sets out there. These guys are doing it with normal sets, just adjusting the formations, and then they get back to running the football. So there's not the crazy pride factor that the offensive line don't feel like they did their job unless everybody was stacked in the box smashing each other. And that's why they are very open-minded to say, we'll take advantage of the fact that your linebackers lined up a little bit to the outside, worried about the pass, and all we got to do is wall him off. So the strategy really does include the running game, Nate. It is a big factor, but not from the physicality, bragging part. Just these guys they're looking at the scoreboard, if that makes sense. Look at the Chiefs' interior offensive line. They would have loved playing in the 70s and 80s, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they would have come out the ball and punched everybody in the mouth. But the fact is, they don't get to use the running game in a powerful way that much. But that doesn't mean they're not effective or don't love playing football. It's just a whole different mentality. It's about how do we get yardage and score points and those kind of things. So the running game is very, very important. The best teams are running the football, and they'll say it's physical, Nate, but they mean strategically physical, right? Like my guy could punch your guy and stop him from moving me. Like the Texas dudes are big. Nate, you're going to have a 300-pounder. Can you not have him push you back 2 feet if you're an offensive lineman? Can you even hold yourself straight up? But can you imagine, Nate, if you actually moved him at 6 inches and he went to your right shoulder and the play's going over your left butt? Like you win the battle right there. It's all about the strategy now. Running, the physicality just means, hey, we can get the job done and not let those guys push us around. That's kind of the new mentality, and it has to be because guess what? Back when Tim Grunhard was playing, they practiced in pads and smashed into each other and had goal line sessions during regular season practice on Wednesdays, okay, and a little bit on Thursday and maybe a little bit on Friday. Now, hardly anyone wears pads. They go through the motions of here's the walk-through steps and a little physicality. So it's a whole different game, but still running the ball really matters.
We have Stan Weber on the line. We'll take a break back after this on Sports Radio 810 WHB.